Hi, this is Editor's Take. I'm Sakshi Batra and with me is Gaurav Chaudhary. He's the Deputy Executive Editor of Money Control and we are here to discuss about the IIP data for September which was released by the government last evening. Thanks a lot, Gaurav, for joining in. Well, it's been a dismal show and this is for the second consecutive month that we have seen a contraction in the IIP data. This time around a 4.3% contraction. Does it really signal a deepening slowdown and no revival in sight so far despite the measures taken by the government?
Yeah, it does signal a slowdown, and please remember that these are data for September. And as we know, in September there were a lot, and this is we need to distinguish and make it very clear that IIP Index of Industrial Production is essentially factory output data. So it has got nothing to do with, it has got nothing to do with sales. So it essentially measures the number of units that are produced in factories.
Right.
In the month of September, the contraction got even sharper. In August, it was minus 1.1. In September, it worsened to 4.3%.
Right.
The reason for that is quite obvious, and we know that is that if you take cars as an example, a vehicle production as an example of this, for several days in the month of September, many vehicle companies had actually announced a production shutdown because there was a lot of inventory pile up, and it was not, people weren't buying cars, and those numbers are are very well established by now that there was a lot of inventory management happening, and primarily because people were not buying cars. So the low sales were translating into lower production, and that forced many companies to actually announce unscheduled shutdown in the factories to clear up the pile of inventory. So that is now showing up. Having said that, to say that so far as revival is concerned, I think, as I said, this is data for September. In the month of October, we do see there is a glimmer of hope, in the sense that if you again take the example of car sales, for instance, passenger vehicle sales have actually gone up by minus 0.3 to 0.4%, which is a significant improvement, given the fact for almost 9-10 months. Successively on the trot, vehicle production and vehicle sales had been negative.
Right.
So it's a big swing, positive swing, and this is and these are wholesale data for car sales. So if the retail sales could be probably even better, but here's a caveat here. October was the festival month,
right,
and most of these may have been driven by festival season sales, which were obviously enabled by very deep discounts. The sustainability of that needs to be seen, whether this kind of growth can be sustained in the subsequent months without discounts. If it holds, then we can say that there is some revival. If it is just a one-off or just a festive season spike,
right,
then I don't think revival is going to be very broad-based.
All right, so revival may not be a very broad-based revival, but we are seeing some green shoots emerging in some of the car sales that we are already seeing in the festive season. But as far as the industrial output is concerned, as far as the components are concerned, almost all of the components did report a negative growth. Where was the sharpest contraction seen, and what was the big reason behind it?
So the biggest concern will be what is happening in the manufacturing sector.
Yeah.
And manufacturing accounts for about 75% of the index of industrial production, and that was understandable. The sharp contraction in the manufacturing sector in the month of September was well known, would have happened, and also in the general index of industrial production.
Sure.
If you go by the core sector data, which accounts for about 40% of IIP, that had also contracted significantly in the month of September. That's showing up in the headline index of industrial production growth numbers.
Sure.
But manufacturing is clearly the cause for concern, which accounts for everything, almost everything that people consume and industries also use for production of final goods and services, final goods. If you take consumer durables, for instance, it's negative. It's now negative for almost 4 months on the trot. Capital goods has been contracting for 9 months on the trot. That's not a good sign. It means that there is very little, in fact, there is negative investment activity. There is no investment activity that is taking place.
Sure.
So companies or factories are not adding capacity lines to meet additional demand. And if there is no demand, obviously there is underutilized capacity. And if there is underutilized capacity, companies or factories will not be adding capacity. And that is showing up in the capital goods output. Likewise, consumer durables has contracted. It means people are not buying, or companies are not producing televisions and refrigerators and microwaves to the extent that they were producing last year.
Right.
And what does it mean? If factories are not producing these kind of goods, it means people aren't buying these kind of goods.
Yeah.
It's not that people can't afford, but probably because they're deferring some of these purchases. And consumer durables also includes cars,
Yeah.
as a matter of fact. But the biggest worry for the government that government would like to keep a close eye on is what's happening in consumer non-durables. Consumer
Yeah.
non-durables includes things, for instance, like toothpaste. Now, if toothpaste production or soap production is coming down, it could well mean that it could be symptomatic or emblematic of what is happening in rural areas, and probably this could be a manifestation of flat growth, or in fact contraction in daily rural wages
Yeah.
in villages, which is not a good sign.
Absolutely, but will this also mean that this will force the government to take more stern measures to push growth further?
No, the government clearly, I think, government is completely aware of what is happening.
Yeah.
The economy is the deceleration in the economy is now well established. Government has announced a set of measures beginning end of August, and in the month of September, we did see that the government did make those big bang announcements
Right.
on corporate tax cuts.
Right.
But what it hasn't really shown is, while these measures are good from the company's profitability point of view,
Yeah.
and that's why the markets have really loved it and toasted it.
Yeah.
But what is required is that how do people, how is it going to stoke demand? In the sense, one of the surest ways of reviving an economy is to give more money into the hands of people so that they can spend and save.
Right.
At this point, consumption spending has completely flattened out.
Yes.
There has to be a way out to deal with that. Unless people go out and spend, and goods disappear from
Right.
shelves of shops at a far more rapid pace than it is doing now.
Right.
Until that happens, revival is going to be sluggish.
And do you think this will also prompt the RBI to go for another round of rate cut?
Over the last three policies, RBI has clearly, or the Monetary Policy Committee has clearly demonstrated on which side of the fence they happen to
Sure.
be in the growth versus inflation contest. And at this point in time, since inflation is firmly, the genie is firmly bottled up, I think that I would not be surprised if the RBI goes ahead or the MPC recommends another rate cut
Yeah.
in December. But the problem here is, to what extent, what happens if interest rate cuts do not stoke demand?
Yes.
That is something that is the domain of fiscal policy. That is why I would believe that the budget for 2021, which is going to be presented in the end of January or on the 1st of February,
Yeah.
is going to be extremely, extremely important. It could well be the occasion for the government to turn around the economy well and truly for a stronger growth trajectory.
Absolutely. And lastly, Gaurav, what are the big expectations for Q2 GDP growth that we are looking at by the end of this month?
It now increasingly appears that the quarter two GDP growth will be below 5%.
Okay.
And because by now we know that all the proxy indicators for July to September quarter
Yeah.
are out, including IIP. And if IIP is contracted, and various services sector indicators or spending indicators are also out.
Yeah.
So we may be looking at a sub 5% GDP growth, which may not be a good sign. But the good sign here, the glimmer of hope, as I said, is that in the month of October there are scattered green shoots, or signs of scattered green shoots of some revival in sales of consumer goods.
Yeah.
If that holds, that's a good sign.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Gaurav, for sharing all that insight. Well, the IIP data for September is definitely dismal and disappointing. What we are now looking at is how soon will the measures taken by the government or the kind of rate cuts that are introduced by the RBI so far will really be able to stoke demand going forward from here on. Thanks a lot for joining us in this edition of Editor's Take, and do stay logged on to moneycontrol.com for more news and updates. Thanks for watching.